making meaningful connections. And so the purpose of this is that I think when we were talking about this webinar, a lot of people know how to know that they need to network, but not necessarily knowing how to properly network. And our presenter will really help us learn about how to make lasting impressions and meaningful connections. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, and really interesting presenter. So Josh actually wrote the #1 best-selling Leadership Step by Step and hosts the award-winning Leadership and the Environment podcast, as well as writes a column for Inc. and blogs daily at joshuaspodek.com. He holds 5 Ivy League degrees, including a PhD in astrophysics and an MBA from Columbia Business School. Currently, Josh teaches leadership and entrepreneurship at NYU and Columbia Business School. And a couple of interesting facts about Josh: he's run 6 marathons, and like most Columbia College alumni, well, we have to pass the swim test, but Josh has actually swam across the Hudson River. He also has done daily burpees since 2011, and currently has done over 100,000 and counting. And it takes him 16 months to produce 1 load of garbage, and hasn't flown since March 2016 by choice. So really interesting presenter we have today. And so without further ado, Josh, please take it away.
Carlos, thank you very much. I want to make sure everyone can hear me. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm getting the yes from Carlos. So, you know, I was going to jump right into it because there is a lot to cover today. But you talk about Columbia and then in the swimming test and things like that. As I walked up, I'm here on campus right now, and I passed by Coronets, and which is like, I almost stopped in to get a slice. It's been so long since I've been there. I couldn't help but mention that. So hopefully that brings back memories for other people from Columbia here. So what I want to talk about first is a bit about you. I want to give some questions for people to think about while I'm doing this. Usually I do this in person. Online, I can't get you guys interactive quite as much, but to get you thinking about what we're going to talk about here. It's not just networking, it's leadership in general. I'm going to introduce what we're going to cover, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership without authority. When you meet someone for the first time when you're networking, you don't have authority over them, and yet you want them to get to know you, to like you, to want to interact with you more. You can't use authority to do that. And it turns out that leading without authority is actually often more effective than leading with authority. And so I'll say a few words about that. And then we're going to go into the exercise, how to make a meaningful connection. And you're going to see Carlos and I are going to do the exercise, and you'll be able to see how it works live and in person. And then you'll be able to practice it yourself. Then I'll talk a bit about the results that come when you are able to practice this exercise effectively and use it to lead people. People thank you for getting them to do things. And it's a remarkable thing when you create meaning for people. And that's one of the effects of this exercise. And at the end, there are going to be questions. So if you have questions along the way, please write them down, or I guess you put them into the onto the computer, and Carlos will pass them on to me at the end. So I'll be able to take a lot of questions at the end.
Great. And if I can interrupt you for 1 quick second, sorry about that, Joshua, but right, the ground rules is that obviously we have an hour today. Josh will give around a 40-minute presentation, and then we'll have around 15 minutes Q&A. As you'll see in the bottom of your screen, there's an area for the Q&A. We're hoping really to keep track of your questions and then go through them at the end with Josh. And so please just keep them in that area. If there's anything really pertinent, I'll reach out to Josh, but hopefully we've set a good amount of time at the end. And then also there will be polls happening during this question. You'll see something at the bottom of your screen, or actually something that you can click on. So without that, sorry for the interruption. Back to you, Josh.
Thanks for bringing that in. Yeah, I want to make this as interactive as possible. So there will be the polls, and I want to get to the questions because the questions generally cover things that if you have a question, almost certainly others do. And so if you ask, we'll get that to a lot of people. So when I'm in person, I ask people to share these answers. Here, you'll just get to think about them, but please think about these questions as I'm going through the presentation. Is what brings you to this leadership/networking session? You don't have to be here. You don't have to cover these things. You don't have to network. And so something brought you here. What brought you here? And then why networking? Of all the things you could learn to do, what is networking for you? What do you want to get out of networking with other people? And for that matter, what is networking? Is it a matter of just getting as many business cards out to as many people as you can? Is it getting as many business cards as you can? Is it sending your resume out to as many people as you can? Or is it something more meaningful? This exercise is designed to get some meaningful connections with people you've just met for the first time, people you've known for a long time, people you're in teams with. It's useful across the board. And a little bit more about you. I've created this presentation and this workshop with the following needs as I understand them, interests that you have. So hopefully I got some of the things that brought you here. So the big thing is, I think you're probably here to learn some effective leadership and networking technique. That's the number one thing I want to give you, is that the ability to network more effectively than you have before. Next is to practice them. So you'll get to see Carlos and I practicing live and in person. And I'm also going to give you the ability to practice it yourself when you are on your own. And in fact, you'll be able to do it as soon as this workshop ends. Within 5 minutes, you can do a meaningful connection with somebody else. Then not just to do it, but also to know why it works, what's going on underneath. And practicing it nothing will substitute for practicing it. That's where you really learn this stuff. But I'll try to cover what I can while we do it. So you're not just doing something, you're doing something and you'll know why it works. And there's going to be a workshop next week. So hopefully you'll get the chance to meet peers with similar interests that you can practice this with. Now that can be through the Alumni Network next week, but also you'll be able to practice this with people in your life immediately after doing this. It could be family, it could be friends, coworkers, and hopefully enjoy the process. I think that most people really enjoy doing the meaningful connection exercise with other people because they connect with people more than they normally would. And they also enjoy teaching others to do meaningful connection back to them, because it feels really good when someone makes you feel comfortable sharing things that you normally don't, which is what this exercise does. So a few words about me. Well, I went to Columbia, so actually I got my PhD in physics. There I am. Hopefully everyone recognizes where this is on the steps. And the PhD was in astrophysics. I helped build a satellite that's orbiting the Earth still, taking data. And I left astrophysics, I left academia to go start my first company. And here's the Wall Street Journal did the first story on us back in 2001. Very exciting. And we did really well for a while. I got squeezed out by the investors. I decided I wanted to keep starting businesses and went back to business school, getting my MBA also at Columbia, looking suspiciously like I did. Actually, this is neither getting my MBA nor my PhD. I was class of 93, and for the 15-year walking, I was invited to represent my class. So this is actually representing the class of 93 at graduation. So a little thing that I don't mention to non-Columbia alumni. Now I teach at NYU in leadership and entrepreneurship, and a few other classes too, but the main thing I like to make my classes very experiential, very project-based. So people that I teach, they get written up for their work. The homework that we cover gets them written up in Forbes and Wall Street Journal and things like that. I've done a lot of workshops at Columbia, and then Spodek Academy, my courses are available online as well, directly from me. Then I have my blog and my podcast, which has won awards, the Leadership in the Environment podcast. I recommend subscribing to both, and they're making big waves. And I have a column at Inc., and I do a lot of speaking and corporate work with the sort of stuff that we're doing today. So, and then my book went bestseller a little while ago. So this is a book on leadership, and this is an exercise from that book, which I'll talk about in a second. And so now a little bit about leadership without authority. Has anyone here had a discouraging manager for a project that you liked? Probably most people I've talked to have. You being here means that you have motivation. You don't have to be here. You've chosen to be here. You've probably worked hard to get where you are. And if you're learning leadership skills and networking skills, you want to get ahead. That means most people in your life also want to get ahead. That means people have motivations. If you can access those motivations, you can lead people more effectively. And this is not a matter of manipulation. This is people, you worked hard to get where you are because something is motivating you. You want that activated. You want to work for the reasons that you wanted to get there. Now, it could be that, there's some people out there flipping burgers, but they're not the people who are in your life. And if those things are motivating them, they want those things out there. People generally don't share them. It's not that they have a lack of motivation. It's generally that when I know your motivation, it makes you a bit vulnerable. It's possible for me to judge you. And so people often will hide their motivations, even though they want to act on those things. As a leader, as someone who's effectively networking with people, you want to get those motivations out there so you can act on those. And people feel great when they don't have to feel like they're protecting their vulnerabilities and they can act on the passions that they really care about. And that's what this exercise is going to enable you to do. It's going to make people feel comfortable sharing what motivates them. And in a way that you can then use those motivations, you can connect those motivations to the person's work. and they're going to thank you for it. They're going to really like it. If you are led that way so that you can do things for the reasons that you want to do, not just, of course you want to get paid, you have to pay your rent, you have to buy food. So external motivations are important. But the internal motivations that motivate you, and that motivate, if you're listening to my voice right now, it means you care about your work. It means the people around you care about their work. And if you're able to make that connection, people value your leadership. The challenge is to reveal those things that make people feel comfortable sharing their vulnerabilities. And that's what this exercise is going to do. Now, is it the only way to do it? No, I'm not saying that. It's one way, but it's a way that works. And once you're able to lead people this way, to influence people this way, to get people to feel comfortable networking with you openly this way, you can manage your manager. So if you have a manager that's been difficult to work with, if you can get them to open up, and meaningful connection is one way to do that, you can lead them, you can up-lead them. It doesn't matter, it isn't through authority, it doesn't matter that they might be higher up in a hierarchy than you. You can still motivate them. And it's the same with family, it's the same with sales, it's the same with interviews, whether you're interviewing someone or being interviewed yourself. These are places where you can, this is a way that you can influence people and lead people effectively. So again, it's called the Meaningful Connection Exercise. My book has 4 units. The first one is understand yourself, then lead yourself, then understand others, and the 4th unit is leading others. And this is the opening exercise in how to lead other people and leading other people. And it opens up a whole bunch of other exercises to follow, but it's the most accessible and often the most fun for people to do. So in the full context, to reach this point in a course, we would have covered understanding yourself, leading yourself, and understanding others first. But this one, it stands on its own pretty well. And I want to give a little context because right now you're listening to someone give a webinar. It's kind of difficult to talk to a camera, and I feel a bit nervous, but I'm still doing it. Years ago, when I was getting my PhD in physics, I had no ability to talk to people that I didn't really know. I'd go to parties, I'd stand in the corner by myself. I didn't really know how to meet people. It was, studying physics, you don't have to, electrons, you don't have to meet them, you just measure them. So I want to give a story about me a little after business school. Even then, I was still, in business school, they teach you network like crazy. Network, network, network. And I would, but I want to tell you the difference between knowing what to do and how to do it. So a couple years after business school, I'm down in the village where I live, and I see signs that there's going to be a panel with some authors. And this is at the new school. And one of the authors had written a book that was very important to me and very influential for me. And I wanted to meet the guy. So I thought, I'm going to meet the guy. I'm going to talk to him and say, thanks for writing a book that made a big influence on me. And so I went. And you know how, this isn't a picture of that panel, but there's 3 authors on stage, a moderator, and they talk for a while. And when it ends, the panelists come down into the audience and everyone can go speak. And I thought, all right, I'm going to go talk to this guy. I worked up the nerve to go talk to him. So I go up to him and I say, I wanted you to know that I read your book and it made a big influence on me. And I wanted to come up and thank you because it was such an important book for me. And he looks at me and says, oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that you shared that with me. And now I had prepared everything to say that part, but I didn't know what to say next. So he's looking at me and I thought, what do I say now? Because he didn't give me anything to say. And so I started thinking, well, I should say something. If I don't say something, he's going to think I'm weird. And now time is passing, and the longer I go without saying anything, the more he's going to think I'm weird. And so I better say something. But now he's going to think I'm even more weird. And he's just looking at me thinking like, what's Josh going to say or do? Like, what's going on? And I'm like, what should I say? What should I do? What should I say? And then finally I'm like, I just stick my hand out and go, well, thank you. And I walked away. And as I'm walking away, I brought a friend with me, and my friend just started laughing at me. And I said, why are you laughing at me? That was really embarrassing. I feel bad. Like I wanted to say something to the guy and I didn't really know what to do. And she said, how could I not laugh? That was just 2 geeks looking at each other, neither of them knowing what to say. And that was like the funniest thing I've ever seen. And the thing was, in business school, they taught me to network, but they didn't teach me how to do it. And they didn't give me experience doing it. So just trying to do something when you don't have experience or a structure or technique to work on, you can do something embarrassing like that. And now I want to fast forward to years later, after I've been spending years developing techniques to teach and to learn experientially, not just what to do, but how to do it. The woman pictured here is Frances Hesselbein. I hope people know her. She's the awardee of the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Bill Clinton. And she got that in part because she was the CEO of the Girl Scouts from 1974 to 1990. And Peter Drucker, the big leadership / management guru, he called her the best leader in America. And she is the mentor of my mentor. Well, now I know her, so I would consider her my mentor as well. And I once met her she actually spoke at Columbia, is where the first time I met her. And then another time I saw her at a book launch. And I said hi to her, and she invited me to have coffee at her office. And so I went to her office. And her office it's an amazing experience because her books are all around the outside, framed in all different languages. And there's pictures of her with every president since, I think, Ford. And she did a lot of work with West Point. So there's these swords that are gleaming that some dignitary gave her. And it's a really tremendous experience. This is an amazing woman on Park Avenue, looking out over Park Avenue. It's beautiful. And she sits me down on the couch, and then she pulls up the chair in front of me, and she sits in the chair, and she's now, maybe her face is maybe 2 feet from my face. And she turns to me and she says, "So what would you like to talk about?" Now, I don't know how that sounds to you, but this is someone called the best leader in America, looks at me and says, basically, you lead me. Pretty tough spot to be in. Well, it would be had I not had the meaningful connection exercise. And I did the meaningful connection exercise with her exactly as I'm going to do with Carlos, and you'll see me in a second. Now, of course, her answers were different, but it went phenomenal. In fact, what was originally scheduled as a half-hour coffee ended up being 3 hours with lunch. And at 3 hours, her assistant came in and said, "Excuse me, Ms. Hesselbein, I have to interrupt. I apologize, but your next appointment is here, and we have to move on, and the next appointment's here, so let's close this down." And Frances turned to me and said, "I don't remember a more delightful conversation." And I was really just doing this exercise with her. And I didn't tell her I was doing it, I just did it. And I want to point out that it wasn't just that we had a delightful conversation, because after that conversation, I think as a direct result of it being a delightful conversation, she put me in touch with the managing editor of her journal, the Leader to Leader Journal, which wins all sorts of awards. And that led to my publishing my first leadership journal article. And she also put me in touch with one of her great heroes, General Lloyd Austin III, a 4-star general from the Army, at the time retired. And that led to me doing a series of workshops at West Point. And working at West Point has been one of the great achievements, one of the great things I've done. And so I just want to point out that making a meaningful connection with someone doesn't just make a meaningful connection. It puts you in a network. It makes things happen. In my case, it had several very prominent and effective business connections and dealings that came from it. All right, now I've talked for a while, so it's time for you guys to think for a bit. So I want to give you guys a poll question. How many times have you experienced where you wanted to meet someone important, but you felt too awkward, or it was difficult, you weren't really sure what to do? Maybe you're in the same room with them, or maybe someone gave you their email address. And so click onto there. Was it once or twice? Was it never? Was it once or twice, 5 or 6 times, over a dozen times, or more often than you can count? And so I see that people are responding, and it looks like a lot of people are more often than I can count, which is that's what I would do. And so I'm seeing a lot of the answers come through. I'm seeing no one has said never. So I see that this is a common thing. I'm seeing a few once or twice, but mostly 5 or 6 times, over a dozen times, more than I can count. Yeah, for me, it would be more than I can count. So in one sense, I'm glad to hear, because I think I can help you. And in one sense, well, let's look at today as the first day of the rest of your life, because I think I'll give you an exercise that you can work on here. And I use this exercise at least weekly. I've probably used it today because I just was interviewing someone on my podcast earlier. I've done it so many times, I kind of do it without thinking about it, actually. And I'm not saying it's the only way to create a meaningful connection. I am saying that it works. So if you don't have ways of making meaningful connections, I recommend using it. If you do, I add it to the arsenal. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not saying no one else can do it. I'm not saying you can't do it any other way, but it works. And it's something to practice like piano scales. It's something that if a piano teacher tells you to practice scales and you play the scale once, you're not going to learn very much. You're going to get something, but not a lot. You have to practice the scales a lot. And if you want to play Carnegie Hall, if you want to be an expert, if you want to be world class, well, the world class people practice the scales more than anybody. And no one is so good at scales that they don't practice them ever again. To watch LeBron James before a finals game, he's still practicing the same jump shots that anyone else practices. And this exercise is kind of like a jump shot. So in this case, I think it happens around 10 or 15 times is when people start, if you practice this exercise 10 or 15 times is when people start feeling it kick in. And upward from there, it starts becoming more and more natural. And I'm not saying this exercise is something that you have to do just like I do forever, but the first couple times I do recommend it. Now, if I were in person, I would ask for a volunteer. Here we have Carlos, and so Carlos and I are going to do this, and you're going to see us do this together, and I'm going to stop sharing the slides, and hopefully you'll see both of us. And I see that we're both on the screen. And so, Carlos, how you doing?
Doing well. Good to see you, Josh.
And I'm going to ask you now, can I ask you, what's a passion of yours besides work and family?
Besides work and family, you know, it's honestly being engaged in Columbia, but in particularly raising money for student scholarships and mentoring first-generation college students.
That's interesting. Okay, so you're raising money for first-generation college students. There's a bit more than that. The first thing that made me think of is when I was starting my first company, and it's not exactly the same thing, but raising money for my first company, getting investment, was, oh man, was that an incredible experience, because you're selling yourself, you're selling this future, you're getting involved with people, and it was my connection into sales, but really, it wasn't just selling stuff. It was really bringing people into my team. And I remember the other people I've spoken to, I've spoken to people they're into like getting rich quick, and they're into like making things very exciting, and they like to, like, them fundraising it's a very exciting thing. Is it like that for you? Is it something, how is it for you?
Well, it's kind of interesting that you're saying that, because the reason why I'm very interested in working with first generation and mentoring first generation students and really raising scholarships is because my grandfather actually was able to attend Columbia University on a scholarship. And my wife is a first generation college student herself. And it was through scholarships that my grandfather was able to attend school. And that really changed the trajectory of my family. You know, and now I am able to be, you know, have 3 degrees from this wonderful university. And my wife, who was an immigrant to this country, was able to attend school on scholarship, and, you know, is now a doctor and getting her MBA as well. And so when I really think about, you know, what you're talking about, that it's not just you, but building this organization, right? I believe that the scholarship and the opportunities that education gives, especially for first generation students, is that upward mobility and can really impact generations.
Wow, this is not just a little thing that you do. This is a really big passion. I wonder if could you share, when you say the scholarships that you give, what's a scholarship for the people that get them?
Sure. I mean, you know, schools like Columbia are great with need-blind admissions, but it isn't only about the finances that help them get through school, but it's also a big adjustment. You know, going through a lot of these things with my wife, well, although she's very smart, there was also a sense of, how do I navigate this? How do I get into medical school? How do I get into business school? And that sense of working with people and connecting to people who have been there through them, so that they understand, you know, how to network and how to get through these things, and really giving that financial support so that they can really focus on their education, about their experience, rather than how they're going to pay tuition and get through the day.
It's interesting that you said, when I think scholarship, I think money, but it's like you take the money out of the picture. And so you've watched your wife go through this. If it's not too personal, do you mind, what's your wife's journey been?
So my wife grew up in Columbia, the country. Her parents don't speak English. Her parents were very poor, but wanted a better life, and moved here. Her father actually parks cars at a garage, but worked several jobs. She was able to go to public school, did very well in public school, and went to college. And, you know, there was really not a lot of people to guide her. And when she went to med school, she didn't think that she was worthy of going to med school or even attending an Ivy. And, you know, when she got into med school, she was like, do I deserve to be here? When she got into great residency and fellowship program, she was still, you know, worried about herself. And now she's attending another, you know, Ivy League business school. And even to this day, now in her 30s, there are still these questions about, like, you know, feeling like a, you know, a fraud. And it's really through helping her connect with others and resources we have and mentorships that we have through the Columbia community, and she's really been able to build a network of friends and a network of mentors, and get scholarships, honestly, to really have these professional and educational opportunities in her life.
Wow. Something tells me that what you are doing is I really want to get into this conversation because I feel like what you're doing for others is enabling them to bring what has happened in your life and your grandfather's life and your wife's life. But I have to put that on hold for a second because I want to get back to this exercise and I have to be responsible to the listeners, although they probably want to hear more too. But we've never had this conversation before.
Right.
And you've never talked about these things to me before. How did it feel first of all, were you speaking about something meaningful to yourself?
Absolutely. Something very, very meaningful to me.
And did it feel like, a lot of people feel when they talk about something meaningful, at the beginning they feel a bit nervous. And maybe how did you feel at the beginning and as we went on through this brief conversation?
As you had mentioned to us, I mean, this is something that I've spoken to people about before, but not really in depth, and something that is, although very important to me, something that we don't, always share in terms of the various aspects of my life, and feeling, like, a fraud, and the struggle and the journey that I've experienced with my wife. But when you spoke about your own struggle and really what it was like to really be the first or start something, it really allowed me to put my guard down. And by the end, I felt a very intimate, personal conversation and personal connection that I was really, opening up to how I felt and on something that was really important to me.
And do you normally speak in front of, on webinars with unknown numbers of dozens of people watching?
No, not very first time.
Okay, so, all right, Carlos, thank you very much. If we were in person, I'd ask everyone in the audience to applaud, so I'm going to applaud. And hopefully people watching are also applauding. I'm going to go back to the screen, and I apologize for stopping in the middle of the conversation. Okay, oh, and Carlos, can you unmute yourself for a second?
Sure.
Did you feel like there was like I was running a script and speaking to you?
Not whatsoever.
Okay, so, and sometimes people at home might think that because it's not designed to be a spectator event. It's designed for the person that you're interacting with. And I don't think I've ever had someone say that they felt like it was a script. And so why a script? Okay, so thank you, Carlos, again.
Yep.
And I make it into a script for a couple of reasons. Because when I speak to someone, what I'm really interested in is the person, who they are, what comes out, and how they share with me, not the structure of how it comes out. And a script gives structure. It gives technique. So it allows me to focus on the other person, allows me to focus on myself, and not worry about what should I say or what should I do. So if someone says, if I go to an event and I network by saying, so where are you from? How many brothers and sisters do you have? What did you major in college? Things like that. That's also a script, but it's a script designed not to make people feel comfortable sharing something that they care about. It's actually to get them to share about things they don't care about. And this, partly because I think most people learn when you meet someone early, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, because people talk about those things, they care about them, and then you get into arguments. And this gets people talking about things they care about without getting into arguments. So I like a script. Oh, and also pedagogically, a script enables you to practice something and practice until you internalize it. And just because it's a script doesn't mean that you're not coming out in it. In fact, give Meryl Streep a script. She's a great actress, but the first time she reads it, she's going to be kind of wooden. After she practices and makes it her own, she is going to come out through the script. And no other actor or actress would play the role exactly the same. So it allows you to be you, but allows you to practice and develop and lets you come out more authentically. So now I want to cover the script. And by the way, when I say script, I partly call it a script to make it seem a little easy to practice. There are a couple places in it where you have to listen very carefully to the other person. It's not just blindly saying a few words. You have to listen very carefully and incorporate what they say into your life, as you'll see. So the first thing, I like to start by asking the person, what's a passion of yours besides work and family? Now, a lot of people aren't comfortable with the word passion, especially in a business context. In fact, I wasn't. The first time someone suggested I use it, it took me 6 months, maybe a year before I felt comfortable doing it. But now it's my go-to, even with someone I've never met before, even in a hardcore business context. But you can say, what's a hobby of yours? What's something you like to do? Make sure you accent doing, not just thinking about or passively observe. So Watching movies generally won't be, if they say watching movies, it's more something they do. So, and I say besides work and family, not because people aren't passionate about their work or their family, but oftentimes thend conversations tend to be ones that they've had so many times that it's hard to get original conversation out of them. Now, if I say besides work and family, and they still come back with, oh, I love my job, I got to tell you about it, then I let them talk about it because they've overcome my resistance. That means a lot's going to come out. Now, they're going to respond usually with something still fairly usual. It tends to be travel, books, food, things that you've heard a lot before. Carlos was a little bit more open and shared a lot more the first time, probably because we were in a context of a Columbia College alumni context. And he shared about something that's relevant to everyone here. And so sometimes you'll get a little bit longer of an answer. They usually don't give that much of an answer because to share what you care about shares what motivates you. It makes you a bit vulnerable because I can judge you, I can laugh at you, I can manipulate you if I know what you care about. If I don't know what you care about, I can't really do those things. So people generally are a bit guarded here. They give an indication, and in their minds, they're thinking about what they really care about more, but they only let a little bit out front. So the question is, how do you make someone feel comfortable sharing what otherwise might make them feel vulnerable? I could say to the person, I'm not going to judge you, I'm not going to laugh at you, I'll support you. But words are cheap. Anyone can say that. In fact, people who judge also say, I'm not going to judge. Just like people who lie say, I tell the truth. Everyone says that. It doesn't really mean anything. You have to do it through your behavior. And it's not the only way to do it, but what I do is to talk about people in my life who do something similar to what that person does. And I do it in a supportive, non-judgmental way. So the next thing in the script is I say, cool, I know, and the parts in green I have to substitute on the fly. And it can be yourself. So I know someone who does X for their reason. I know someone else who does X for their reason. Why do you do X? So if you'll go back and I believe you're going to get a copy of this recording, and you can go back and see exactly what I said, but the first someone I know was me, and does X was I raised funds, and my reason was building a team, if I remember what I said. I didn't try to memorize it as I was saying it. And then I talked about other people who raise funds, and they raise funds for different reasons. It's exciting for them. And then I said to Carlos, why do you raise funds? Now imagine someone's talking to you and speaks to you about something that you do about two other people in a supportive, non-judgmental way. What does that say about how I'm going to talk about you? I've had this exercise done back to me many, many times. And when someone does it to me, I feel like they get me, they understand me, they're not going to judge me, they're not going to manipulate me because they've spoken about these other people in a supportive, non-judgmental way. I feel like I'm going to be supported and not judged. And so generally what happens after step 3 is that the next person gives a significantly longer answer. And that answer is going to be, because in step 2, they were out on a limb. Step 3, I brought them back out from the limb. And so they're more supported, they're closer to the trunk. And they can speak more because they're on more solid ground. And they're going to speak more at length. And now, no matter what they say, all the words that they say can never represent exactly what's in their heads, exactly what's in their hearts. And there's going to be some nonverbal communication in what they say. And one of the things that will happen is that there's often going to be at least 3, sometimes more words that they particularly accent. Maybe they'll pause after saying it, or they'll say it louder, or if you're in person, then you'll see their eyes light up, or sometimes they'll repeat the word several times. And those words carry the emotion of what they're saying. And emotion is where meaning is. And if you respond to them using those words, they will hear all the meaning that they put into it. And in fact, they will often feel like they want to expand on it. They'll feel listened to and heard. And they'll want to explain what they meant in using those words. So while they speak, you have to listen to what they say, but also pay attention to a few of the words. And the last step is to respond to them, usually just asking a simple clarification question, using those meaning-carrying words. So when he spoke passionately about several different things. So one of the things I noticed, he used the word scholarship several times. And so I said to him, what does it mean for you? I forget exactly the words that I said, but I used the word scholarship. Can you clarify what you mean by scholarship? And he went on at greater length. And I believe, you'd have to ask Carlos, but I believe at greater meaning of what came next. And so he started sharing what that scholarship meant. The big takeaway I took away was that he's actually removing money from the picture and enabling them to do everything else that's important to them. And then when he finished that, there were a couple other meaning-carrying words. I'm not sure if you picked up on the next one, but he mentioned his wife several times. He also mentioned his grandfather several times. And so wife and grandfather, I took it very close relationships with him. And so I asked him about his wife, and that brought in a lot more. And when Carlos comes back on again, when we do the Q&A afterward, I'll ask him, and so Carlos, prepare. Or you can jump in if you want, but actually, Carlos, do you mind jumping in for a second?
Hey, Josh.
So sorry about to put you on the spot. Did you notice when I used the words scholarship or when I used the word wife with you, did you notice by any chance the words, and if so, did you notice your emotions when you heard them? Not everyone would have paid attention, so it's not like you must have.
No, but I even like mentioning it now, like it's something that like riles up, some sense of like pride and happiness or like doing inside of me.
Yeah, that's generally people remark that. Thank you again, Carlos, and talk to you again in a minute when we do the Q&A. And the number one answer I get when I ask that question is, I felt listened to. And the next most common answer is, I felt understood. And it feels really great when people feel heard, and using those meaning-carrying words. A lot of people remember this exercise as what's your passion? And that's like remembering a race as the starting line, as like getting off the starting line. But there's a middle, which is supporting them. The middle is that the step 3 is speaking about people in a supportive, non-judgmental way that do something similar to that person. And so it's a lot about support. But the big thing is using those words back to them is an amazing feeling. It feels great when you feel listened to. I mean, I could ask this question in an audience. I can get everyone in their room to raise their hand by asking, how many people wish they were heard more? How many people wish other people made more of an effort to understand you? So that's what this exercise gives. And I urge you not to remember it as merely what's your passion, but also and then to support them in a supportive, non-judgmental way, and then to give them that gift of feeling listened to, feeling understood. So if we had more time, I would ask 2 volunteers to come up from the audience, or to have Carlos do it back to me. Because of time limitations, I can't. But everyone who's here, you can do this with others, and you can practice this immediately after this workshop ends. And all you have to do is walk up to someone and start doing the exercise. In fact, what I recommend starting with is the first couple times, write it down. I mean, you'll get the slides, and to sit down with someone that you know, someone that's not too judgmental, someone who's supportive, and put the script in front of them and say, I'm going to practice this with you. Do you mind? And some will say no, but some will say yes, and you practice it. And then I recommend having them practice the script back to you. And when you do step 3, it's a little challenging because you have to think on the fly of who these people are that do something like that other person does. And so take a break before you do step 3 and do it slowly. It takes 10 or 15 times before it starts feeling natural. And when you do it, practice it both ways and make sure you get to the end. Start with what's your passion or what's your hobbies, what's something you'd like to do, show that support in the middle, and use those meaning-carrying words at the end. And when you're doing it, when you're the one starting it, doing the odd numbers, make sure you get to what their meaning-carrying words are and use them. Often it's just a clarification word. What did you mean by scholarship? Or can you tell me more about how your wife interacts with this? And if you have them doing it with you, so you're on the receiving end, you're doing the even-numbered parts, think of how you feel. Pay attention to the emotions that you feel when they ask you the first question, when they ask you the second question, when they use those meaning-carrying words back to you. Because how you feel is how you're going to make others feel. And usually have them practice a few times, because the first couple times they do it, it's usually most people are a bit awkward. As they practice more and more, it starts to become more and more natural, and I predict you'll start feeling really comfortable by step 3, and you'll start feeling really listened to, and you'll probably feel compelled to start speaking at length because you're like, yeah, this is something I've really wanted to talk about when they use those meaning-carrying words. In fact, if any of you ever meets Carlos on the street and you say to him the words scholarship or grandmother or wife or all of them together, I predict that he will start talking to you. Even if it's 10 years from now, he'll tell you a lot. It'll carry a lot of meaning for him. And that'll be the case with anyone that you do this exercise with. If you use those meaning-carrying words, that they will start feeling like they really want to talk about this thing. So again, it's about support and follow-up. It's much more about the other person than it is about you. It's 95% for them, 5% for you. You'll hear about their stuff, but they'll feel really good. And when I have people that can answer in person, I ask them, what do you call it when you feel another person's emotions? And Different people answer different ways, but I think of this as an exercise that develops in you the skill of empathy. And empathy, I've never heard a leader say empathy hurts a relationship. Yeah, and so after you do the exercises, what do you pay attention also to the behavior that the other person exhibits? Did they look comfortable, uncomfortable? Did it change over time? Did they lean forward? Did they lean back? Did they give you one-word answers? Did they give longer answers? So pay attention to their behavior and pick up on these things. The more that you do this, the less that you think about the exercise and the more that you notice the other person and pay attention to them. Eventually, the structure of the exercise fades into the background and it just becomes about you and them. Also pay attention to your behavior. Personally, I really enjoy this. I start really getting into the conversations. I've never gotten bored with this. Either the person shares something that's really interesting, which is certainly the case with Carlos, or if it's something not interesting to me, their passion for it usually makes it interesting to me, and generally it's both of those things. And I want to point out that though this is a fun and useful exercise, which I use in interviews, when I'm looking for new clients, I use in networking situations, I use when I'm doing my podcast, it's just the beginning of a big effective leadership technique that's the rest of Unit 4 in my book, and what I do when I do corporate training and things like that. We develop this, well, in a sentence, it's to behave, this is my leadership style, is to behave and communicate so others feel comfortable sharing their emotions and motivations, so that I can, which normally people feel vulnerable about sharing, but to make people feel comfortable sharing what often makes them feel vulnerable, and then connect those things to the work that they're doing, to the work to be done, and that imbues that with meaning. It'll make that work, it'll make their work feel purposeful and meaningful, and they'll feel, you will feel if people do it with you. I feel when people lead me this way, like I'm doing it for my reason. Yeah, I'm glad to help the team, but I'm also doing it, it's an internal intrinsic motivation that activates. And most people, as I said before, if you're here listening to my voice now, you care about these things. And that means the people in your life care about these things. They have these motivations. Those motivations that are already in the people around you are stronger than any motivation that you can attach to that. They're stronger than any extrinsic motivation. And this is the first exercise in a series of exercises, which are in the book, in my courses, that develop these skills more and more. So as I mentioned, those are the 4 units, and the book covers them all. And so now I want to give a question back to everyone out there before we take questions back from you, is moving forward, for you guys, for you people listening, how many times do you commit to practicing this exercise? You could do it once, you could do it 5 times, 10 times, 25 times, 100 times. And I don't know who you are, so I won't feel bad if it's a low number, although I recommend high numbers. And I see a bunch of people 1 time jumping out to an early lead. Oh, now 5 times is jumping out to the big lead. And it generally, in my experience, is that doing it, watching it is probably kind of interesting, but doing it I think is going to be much more interesting. So if you're one of the people putting it down for 1 time, I hope that if it goes well, you'll consider doing it another time. And if that goes well, to consider doing it more times. So I find around 10 or 15 is where it starts internalizing and where you stop worrying about, am I doing it right? And you start seeing the underlying skills that you're developing, the underlying patterns in the social and emotional skills that are going on. So I see that 5 is out at the big lead with 1 next behind, and a few 10 times, a few 25 times. I'm definitely over 100 times, although I probably wouldn't have said I would do it over 100 times. It just worked out that way because I found it worked so well. So, and by the way, if people find it useful or if people don't find it useful, please contact me and let me know how things go. I'm happy to troubleshoot, and I really like people finding that this works for them, and I want to help it work for you. So, oh, and that's the end. So thank you, and I want to go to questions, and I want us to leave plenty of time for questions, and hopefully Carlos has gotten a few, and so I'll take them.
Great. Well, thank you again, Josh. Just to remind everyone, so on the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A section, and please write your questions there. We already have a couple in the queue. And Josh, right on time, stopped at 12:45, so we do have 15 minutes for questions. So let's jump right into it. The first question that we have is, has this method ever not worked, or has it ever backfired on you?
I don't believe, it certainly has never backfired on me, and I don't recall anyone ever coming back to me, any of my students or clients coming back to me and saying this didn't work. I've had some great successes. One year I was teaching an entrepreneurship class, and I incorporated this into it at NYU. It was with students getting their master's degrees. If you don't mind a longer answer, I'm going to tell a longer answer. And this one particular year, at our class time, there was also a job fair. And I worked with the people at the job fair and asked them, could I bring my class to the job fair? And they're very happy. Yeah, bring more students. And I had my students, I said, if you want to bring your resumes, sure, you can, but that's not required. Go and do the meaningful connection exercise with people. And so the class before this, I had them practice with me. And then we went to the event and I said, everyone pick a company that you want to, or pick 5 companies that you want to work with and do the meaningful connection exercise with the people instead of the usual pitching yourself. And all the students went out, and it's a big crowded room full of, the tables and all the people behind the tables are the people representing the companies, and all the students are going up to them and they're doing their thing. And this woman comes up to me, one of my students, and she is literally jumping up and down and smiling ear to ear, and she's giggling. And what's going on? And she goes, I got invited to have an interview with one of these companies. I said, what happened? And she goes, well, I went up and I just did meaningful connection exercise, and I didn't think it was going to happen because they weren't looking for, she was a designer, and they'd put down that they were only looking for programmers. And the guy said, why don't you come to our office next week and have an interview? And she said, I'd be happy to, but I thought you weren't looking for designers. And he said, yeah, we're looking for people who get it. And you get it. I can teach people to program, but I can't teach people to get it. And you get it. And so this is my example of the opposite of it backfiring. That it excelled. You can't teach getting it, because she had learned this technique, and that's what got her. I believe that's what worked for her. And so it's got some very outsized successes. In my cases, have there been times when there have been times when it hasn't backfired. It's just someone doesn't really engage. And if I ask them what's a passion of yours besides work and family, they'll say, I don't really have anything. Sometimes I'll politely persist, and if nothing happens, then I can always fall back on weather or sports or something like that. Although usually I use that to develop my techniques. When something doesn't work as planned, then that's usually an opportunity for me to learn. So sorry for the long answer. I've never heard it fail. I've never heard it backfire. No one's told me. And if someone tries this and it backfires, please let me know, because that will give me a chance to learn from it.
Sure. Great. Oh, wow. The questions are rolling in. So let's start answering some of them. So this question says, it seems that you would already have to know someone before asking them, what's your passion? How do you start or segue into this method? Do you just ask people what they're passionate about?
I'll say it in 2 stages. The first is when you're first learning the exercise, I recommend working with people that you know. And in fact, the first bunch of times, tell them that you're practicing it, because it's like doing drills in a sport. First, you got to get the skills down. So when you're first doing it, definitely work with people that you know and practice, and tell them that you're practicing. Have them practice it with you. As you develop the skills more and more, then you can start doing it with increasingly, foreign people that you don't know as well. For me, now that I've been doing it for years, I will walk up to someone that I've never met before, someone that I really want a relationship with, and I will say, hey, great to meet you. My name's Josh. We're in the same place at the same time. If you don't mind my asking, what's a passion of yours besides work and family? I do that. First couple words I'll say to someone will involve meaningful connection. I wouldn't start off that way until you've done it many times. But the more that you practice it, the more natural it becomes. And now I won't talk to people about weather, sports. If there's the finals on, I'll talk about that. But generally, I find those create meaningless connections, and I have less and less patience for having meaningless connections with people. If I'm at a store and I'm going through the checkout, I'm not going to try to make a meaningful connection with that person. I might, but I don't go out of my way. But if it's a work connection or someone that I want to spend time with, or family or friend, yeah, I'm going to do that. And it's fine to do it with people that you've known for a long time. One of my clients, he came to me because he had issues with his CEO, and he wanted to improve that relationship. And I gave him this exercise, and I said, practice it before doing it with the CEO. Get it down. Practice with a lot of other people. So the next week when he came back, he said he did. He sat down, had it written out, and sat down with it written in front of with his wife. And he said, I'm going to do this exercise with you. She said, great. And he said that when he was doing step 3, he said his read of her was that she stopped doing an exercise. She was just really answering him. And he said that she started telling him things that she had never told him. And they were married 9 years. And that sort of thing happens. So you can do it with people you've known. You can do it with people you've never met before. With people you've never met before, I recommend doing it 5 or 10 times before working up to them.
Sure. Great. Josh, thanks again. And before our next question, just let those, a couple of people might have come on late. So the presentation deck will be shared with those, as well as this webinar is being recorded. Finally, for those who are interested in practicing, we will be sending out an email to the participants after this webinar. And if people want to practice with other participants of the webinar, we will be more than happy to try to connect you afterwards so that you can practice with someone who heard Josh's presentation and who is trying as well to practice the method. As well as Josh mentioned, you can practice today with someone you're comfortable with, even before then. So the next question I have for you, Josh, to get back to the Q&A, is that after a good conversation, how do you maintain that connection? How do you follow up? I've met great people at networking events and tend to wonder, now what?
So, I mean, what I often do is I actually do meaningful connection more than once with someone. I find that when they talk about one passion, they often will talk about other passions as well. And so I'll talk about other people in a supportive, non-judgmental. If I talk to someone about food and they really love food, and they start talking about all the restaurants when they go to, I will often say, it sounds like restaurants are a passion for you too. And they say, yeah. If they say yes, then I will continue, and then I'll talk about restaurants. I'll do step 3, using restaurants as the next passion. No one that, as far as I know, no one has picked up that I'm using the same pattern twice in a row. So that's something I like to do. Another thing I like to do, of course, I can just go into talking. If I were to continue talking to Carlos, I would talk about his grandfather. I would talk about more about his wife, and there was a lot going in. Like, it was hard for me to stop talking to Carlos about what he does. And oftentimes I'll often share a passion of mine that's related. So these are natural flows that will come from it. So I can talk about other passions of theirs. I can go into more depth about this particular passion. I can talk about passions of mine, because it's hard not to reciprocate that. I can always fall back on weather and sports. I generally don't. I don't like to, but I can do that. Oh, since you mentioned at networking events, I picked up that this question was talking about at networking.
Right, sorry, and really fast, Josh, because we have several questions about this. And the big thing is that from the comments we're getting, is that people feel that this is more a tool to utilize in a personal setting, but really wondering about the context of, say, professional networking, that you just can't go into a professional event and ask people what their passion is. So please speak to that in your answer, if possible.
Oh, I believe I would have said the same thing at the very beginning. You don't have to use the word passion, although I will point out one of my clients had a friend who won a lunch with Warren Buffett. And if you look online, you can find it. She wrote it up, and like every other word out of the guy's mouth was passion. And I submit Warren Buffett as a potential candidate for a successful businessman. And if Warren Buffett can talk about passion all the time, then I think others can too. And you might say, well, he's Warren Buffett. Well, maybe that's part of how he became that. Now, the first bunch of times you do it, you won't feel as comfortable using the word passion. Talk about hobbies. Talk about what's something that you do besides work and family. What's something that you really like. You can do it. Now, I use this increasingly the more important a meeting is, the more important someone I'm working with is. I use this in interviews, whether I'm being interviewed or whether someone's interviewing me. Carlos, we spoke, and at the end of it, did you want to tell me more about what you were saying? Did you feel like you wish you had said less, or did you feel it was about the right amount?
No, I wanted to talk about more. I even forgot that we were on a webinar, not even in the same room. I was fully engaged in the dialogue we were having and the experiences we were sharing, or I guess I was sharing.
So I put to people out there listening, what do you want more out of an interview than for the other person to want you back, that they want to talk to you more, that they want you around? Even if you don't want the job or the client, you want that to be your choice, not theirs. If they want to have you back, they want to keep talking to you. They want you in their life. And I can tell you, every now and then I will remember someone's meaning-carrying words for a long time, and I reuse them later, and we get right back into a meaningful conversation. So if you're one of the people saying this sounds like something in a non-business situation, sure, by all means, start in non-business situations. You're going to be going to a lot of cocktail parties. I mean, we're right in the holiday season. We got a bunch of cocktail parties. Most people probably have a bunch of cocktail parties coming up, a bunch of social situations. Use it there. Practice it. as you do it more and more, I believe that you'll find people feel comfortable opening up with you. Teamwork works when people have each other's backs, when you know what motivates the other person, when you know what the other person cares about. If you live a life where you don't know what the people on your team, if you think they're all in it for the money, if you think they're all in it just to retire as quick as they can and stop doing this stuff because they hate what their work is, you're going to reject that. You're going to attract people like that in your life. If you talk about passion, you share passion, you make people comfortable sharing their passions with you, you will live a more passionate life. You will find that people are more passionate than you think. I have another client of mine. He wanted to leave his job. He hired me to help him switch jobs. And he complained about all his coworkers. They hated what they did. He said it was a really terrible place to work. They were all boring people. I said, you work there. Are you a boring person? He said, no, I'm different. I said, why do you think you're different and no one else is? I said, try this exercise. He goes, Josh, I've met everybody. I've had beers with everybody outside of work. I know what they're all like. I said, having beers with people, you get one facade at work. You might just get the, after work for beers facade. Try the exercise. Next week he comes back. He said, Josh, they're really interesting people. Like one of them's making a treehouse for his kids. Another one is he and his wife are taking some dance lessons. And I said, yeah, they were always interesting. If you make them feel comfortable sharing these things, they want to. People like sharing these things, even with coworkers, especially with coworkers. You spend a lot of time with these people. So I can see why people might feel nervous sharing these things or talking about passion. But the more that if you aren't comfortable using the word in the place where you spend most of your waking time, how open are you to having passion in your life? Don't you want to feel passionate about your work? So practice with people you know. I predict that over time, for me it took 6 months. I'm not saying this is quick and easy, but I predict that you'll start having more passion in your life.
Sure. So, okay. So Josh, we have 2 minutes left. And so we're not going to get to all the questions, but hopefully we can get 2 questions in 2 minutes. So the first question that we had are, what are some resources you draw this information from? And as someone who's searched your website, I know that there is a plethora of information on your website, but please let us know. What do you recommend as some resources?
Well, I'm going to post on my blog today with a link to the slides, which I think you're going to get separately, but also put a link to videos of me doing Meaningful Connection with Marshall Goldsmith. He's the mentor whose mentor was Francis Hesselbein. And Marshall has a bunch of exercises that are like this. For example, his feed forward exercise. This is based on it in terms of the size and scale of it. It's a script that you follow that really engages people and you learn from it. I still use his exercise feed forward all the time, and it's tremendously useful. So that type of exercise of a short script that you can practice and you'll keep learning from, very useful. I have to recommend my book. Marshall Goldsmith's books. I don't know how much depth I should. Oh, and also there's videos of me doing it with him. So those are some things that come to mind. A big change in mindset that I didn't get, even through business school, was the following mindset. Everybody who has some behavior-related skill learned it somehow. Nobody was born leading. No one was born doing sports or acting or dancing. Everybody learned those things, and they all learn them through practice. Any skill that I see someone else having, whether it's charisma or leadership or something like that, they learned it somehow. If they learned it, I can. And oftentimes you can ask them, how did you learn that? And if you can come up with an exercise that will mimic that for you in your life, you'll be able to learn what they learned. And that is a counter to the myth that people are born leaders or born salespeople or born networkers or someone has to be born charismatic. You can learn, if someone learned it, you can too. It does take practice. It can be hard, but it's only practice.
Sure. And one last question, because we're actually at time, but I feel that this is an important question that several people have asked. Josh, after we have that meaningful connection, after we leave, how do we follow up and continue that relationship? What is the best thing we can do?
There, it's going to depend on the person. This gets you really connected with that person. Oftentimes, if I can do business with that person, then I'm going to try to figure out how can we connect again next time. How can we continue this conversation? If I'm in a networking event where there's a lot of people in the room and I want to meet a lot of them, I'll do meaningful connection with one, and then I'll say to them politely, there's a lot of people here and we're supposed to network. So I really want to keep talking with you, but I have to be responsible and talk to a lot of people. And then I'll go to the next person and I'll do meaningful connection with that person until I've done it with 5, 6, 7 people. And now I have 5 or 6, 7 people that I've done meaningful connection with. And I'll go back in my head and think of who is the one that I really want to talk to the most. And I'll go back to that one and then continue that conversation with the remaining 4 or 5 people that I also connected with. They'll often come and join that conversation. I often have like a group of 5, maybe even 10 people in a circle in a networking event because I've done meaningful connection with a bunch of them and just politely ended each one, but then went to the next one and brought us all together.
Great. Well, that is time. First of all, Josh, I'd really like to thank you for giving us your time and your insights. Again, really interesting and I think really helpful. To the attendees who are with us for this hour, thank you for making time out of your schedule. Would also like to thank Columbia and CAA for starting this inaugural Alumni Talk, and hopefully you can join us with several of the others. Again, this presentation, the slides, as well as more information on this webinar will be available. Additionally, please let us know if you'd like to connect to other participants who are willing to connect to practice. But with that, we hope you have a great day and a great holiday season. Thanks again, everyone.
And thank you from me as well.